Michael Anderson, a black attorney, was unjustly arrested outside the police station. The officers didn't realize he was leading their investigation. This case of racial bias revealed corruption within the system, setting the stage for an unexpected response. Michael Anderson, a black lawyer known for his civil rights cases, was no stranger to adversity. Throughout his career, he had faced countless instances of injustice and discrimination, but always maintained his dignity and unwavering belief in justice. His clients appreciated his determination, and his colleagues respected him for his professionalism and principles. Michael had made a name for himself defending victims of racial discrimination, often securing justice in the most challenging cases. On this day, he had an appointment with a new client. It seemed like an ordinary day, one that gave no warning of impending trouble. As always, he was well prepared, dressed in a sharp suit, walking confidently. His mind was already working through the case details, thinking ahead about how to present his client's arguments most effectively. Michael was never late and, as usual, had timed his arrival to be a few minutes early. After parking near the large police station, he quickly checked a message from his client, grabbed his briefcase, and got out of his car. But just as he took a few steps toward the building, a patrol officer called out to him. "Your papers!" the officer barked, without giving Michael a chance to ask why. There was tension in the officer's voice, and Michael immediately sensed trouble. Initially, Michael calmly handed over his documents, thinking it was just a routine check. But the situation quickly deteriorated when another officer approached and began searching his car without any explanation. Michael remained composed and polite, asking why they were acting this way. The officers did not answer, only casting suspicious glances at him, as if they had already made up their minds without bothering to find out who he was or why he was there. Michael tried to explain that he was an attorney, there for a professional matter, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officers continued their search, and eventually, without charging him with anything, they put him in handcuffs. It was shocking to him, but despite the absurdity of the situation, he remained calm. His years of legal experience told him that panicking or becoming aggressive would only make things worse. He knew he had to wait for the right moment to use his knowledge of the law to defend himself. As they drove him to the police station, Michael reflected on the fact that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a systemic injustice he had seen many times before in his work. But now, it was happening to him personally. He realized this case would be yet another example of what people faced daily because of the color of their skin, and he was ready to use all his skills to fight for justice, for himself and those he represented. When Michael Anderson was placed in a holding cell, he felt the weight of the injustice, but remained calm. Years of legal work had taught him to keep his emotions in check, even in the most difficult situations. The cell was cold and stuffy, but Michael knew his case wouldn't be forgotten. He took a deep breath and sat on the bench, thinking about what had just happened. He assumed the situation would soon resolve, but he didn't realize how far the chain of errors would go. A little while later, he overheard two officers talking nearby. They were openly discussing his arrest, not bothering to learn his name or status. One of them smirked and said, "I wonder who we've got this time. Not the first time we've caught one of these guys. They always act like they're someone important." The second officer, equally clueless about who was behind bars, added, "Yeah, some smart guy. Thinks he can lecture us just because he's wearing a suit." They hadn't even bothered to look at Michael's documents, convinced they had arrested just another suspicious stranger. Sitting on the bench, Michael felt a bitter sting. They hadn't even tried to find out who he was. This was just another manifestation of the bias he had encountered many times in his career. He knew that to them, he was just a black man in a suit, which automatically raised suspicion. These officers had no idea that the next day they would be working alongside this suspect on the most important case of their careers. Hours passed, and time seemed to drag, as if it moved differently in the holding cell. Finally, the doors to the precinct opened, and the police chief, a heavy-set, middle-aged man with a serious expression, walked in, holding several documents. He stopped at the desk, flipping through the papers until he froze, staring at one of the pages. First, confusion crossed his face, then horror. He realized what had happened. "Who is this?" the chief roared, glaring at the officers. "You arrested Michael Anderson? Do you have any idea what you've done? This man is the lawyer who's supposed to lead the corruption investigation into our department." The officers turned pale. They exchanged panicked glances, realizing they had made a catastrophic mistake. Their inaction and prejudice had led them to arrest the very person who was supposed to be spearheading an investigation that they were involved in. The chief, staring down his subordinates, continued. "Do you understand that Anderson was appointed to head this critical investigation? Tomorrow, he was supposed to meet with our team to go over all the details, and instead of making a good first impression, you arrested him." Michael had been sitting in the cell, listening as the truth about his arrest unfolded. He had been waiting for the moment when everything would finally become clear, knowing that this case wouldn't just be an example of a mistake, it would be a symbol of how deeply rooted bias was in the system. When the truth about Michael Anderson's arrest emerged, the police chief was shocked. What seemed like a minor mistake now threatened an investigation into internal corruption. The chief quickly rushed to correct the situation. Michael sat, waiting for release, when the chief entered, filled with concern. He knew this could lead to a lawsuit, and the wrongful arrest of an attorney could damage the department's reputation. "Mr. Anderson," the chief began, "we apologize for this mistake. I will order your immediate release." Michael stayed calm, deciding not to take immediate legal action. Instead, he saw an opportunity for change. "I appreciate your apology," Michael said, "but this case requires more attention." The chief, fearing a lawsuit, was surprised when Michael suggested a private conversation. They moved to the chief's office. Michael spoke firmly. "This isn't just about one mistake. You arrested me because I'm black." The chief knew he was right. The incident wasn't just an error, it was part of a systemic problem. "I'm not going to sue," Michael continued, "but we need to address bias in your department. This case can drive that change." The chief, expecting resistance, was taken aback by Michael's proposal to work together for reform. It offered a chance to correct deeper issues. "You're right," the chief finally said. "It will take time, but I'm willing to commit." "We have what we need to begin," Michael replied. "This is an opportunity to improve the system for everyone." Michael left, feeling that the wrongful arrest had turned into a step toward meaningful reform. The incident was no longer just a mistake, it was the start of needed change. Despite the humiliating arrest and his deep disappointment in the justice system, Michael Anderson didn't seek revenge. He knew that personal vengeance would only distract him from his true goal, bringing systemic change to the police department, eradicating corruption and bias. His focus remained on the main objective, cleaning up the system's deep-seated problems and exposing the violations that had gone unseen for years. Now, as he led the investigation, Michael found himself in an unusual position. He had to coordinate efforts with the same officers who had arrested him based on racial stereotypes. This created a palpable tension, especially among those who felt guilty about their actions. However, instead of displaying open hostility, Michael demonstrated professionalism and stayed focused on the main task, achieving justice. His ability to remain composed and focused earned the respect of even those who were initially skeptical of him. The investigation began with an analysis of complaints that had been filed against the police station, but were never pursued. Soon, Michael's team uncovered troubling facts. Numerous instances of abuse of power, where people were detained and subjected to violence without proper cause. Further research revealed hidden racist practices that were not limited to a few rogue officers, but were supported by leadership at the highest levels. Documents, records, and witness testimonies began to form a clear picture of systemic bias. Michael paid special attention to analyzing how bias affected the everyday actions of officers, who was arrested most frequently, what assumptions led to searches, and which population groups were most often subjected to aggressive detention methods. These findings opened his eyes to how deeply discrimination had infiltrated police practices. After several months of hard work, his team compiled a massive amount of evidence that became the foundation for a court case. When the case went to trial, Michael's team presented indisputable proof that the police system needed comprehensive reform. They highlighted numerous incidents where officers overstepped their authority, and racial bias played a key role in on-the-spot decisions. During the court hearings, as the truth came to light before everyone's eyes, Michael felt more confident than ever. He knew that this fight was only the beginning of a long journey, but he already understood that their work had made a real impact. Public interest in the case grew, and human rights organizations soon joined the call for police reform. The media covered the trial extensively, increasing pressure on the authorities. When the court issued its ruling, it called for sweeping reforms within the police department. The officers involved in corruption and those who had upheld racist practices were removed from duty. Internal changes began, aimed at restoring public trust in law enforcement and creating a fairer system. Michael Anderson had proven that even as a victim of injustice, one could use knowledge and experience to fight the system, change it from within, and make it more just. His story became a symbol of how personal pain and humiliation could be transformed into a catalyst for change, showing that resilience and a commitment to truth could overcome any injustice.